All right, joined by my guy, Brian Toporek, covering the Sixers for Forbes and for Liberty Ballers, as well as he is the host of the NBA pod with our guy, Morton Stig Jensen. Brian, thank you so much for coming on, man. We put it off long enough, didn't we?
We tried. We're holding out hope for this James Harden trade that's never actually coming. But yeah, thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
We're recording this on October 12th, and Brian and I had initially talked about recording this a week plus earlier, and then decided, you know what, let's hold off just in case this Clippers trade actually goes through. As of October 12th, hasn't gone through yet. James Harden is still a member of the Philadelphia 76ers, and apparently the training camp has gone like reasonably well. I mean, it's hard to really argue with the results at this point. Is that the most interesting thing going on with the team right now? I can't imagine it's anything otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, begrudgingly, yes. I mean, interesting only in the sense of like we still don't really know what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time because like he hasn't played in the preseason yet. Nick Nurse last night said seems like everyone's going to be available Monday, but he didn't want to bet on it. So
I love that framing, by the way.
Yeah, hilarious. Right. Yeah. So like I would be surprised to see James Harden play a single preseason game. And then we get to October 26th when they play the Bucks, and I still don't know whether he's going to suit up or not. There is the clause in the CBA that if he withholds services for more than 30 days, they can prevent him from becoming a free agent. So I imagine he's going to play. What percentage of effort you get out of him, very much an open question.
Yeah, we've seen this song and dance before with the 2019-20, or was it the 2021? It was one of those years, yep. the Houston Rockets, where you trade Russell Westbrook in the offseason for John Wall. Everybody's all excited about what that's going to look like, and then it just kind of fizzles out because James doesn't really want to be there. I don't know whether that's going to be what it's like this year. It may be, it may not be, but given that clause in the CBA, there's a possibility that he actually does play and does try to get the contract, given how much money he's already lost on some of the deals that he's made or not made. In your mind, does Harden get traded sooner rather than later? Is this going to extend on into the season for an extended period of time? And is going to go to the Clippers or what?
I mean, it's up to the Clippers. I think the Sixers have been very clear about what their asking price is. I think the Clippers have been very clear that they don't want to increase their offer, and I don't see any reason to expect that standstill to break one way or the other. Again, we'll see, if Harden comes and loafs his way through games, I think the Sixers will just send him home. I don't see why they would put up with having him. He's not the player he was 2 or 3 years ago when you were in Houston, right. You're the best player on the team. Like, you need this guy to be here to be remotely competitive. I think they feel good about their team either way. Like, at least there are enough things that they can use this season to figure out about their long-term picture that regardless of whether Harden is there or not, you can still have a productive season in that regard. Woj has reported and Shams have reported in recent days. Sounds like the Clippers have offered 1 pick, 1 swap, expiring contracts. I think Shams and Sam Amick of The Athletic were the ones who said the Sixers want Terrence Mann and multiple picks. Woj says the Clippers are now shopping their unprotected 2028 first-round pick to other teams, see maybe if you can break this up and, go to the Thunder, who have 15 first-round picks and who did a deal with the Denver Nuggets that was similar to this, where, you trade a couple picks for a much more lightly protected first-round pick way down the road, because they just are not going to have roster spots at some point for all of these picks. So maybe whether it's the Thunder, the Spurs, the Jazz, a team with multiple future first-round picks that might be interested in a fully unprotected 2028 Clippers first, when you've got Kawhi, Paul George, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, all in their mid-30s already, or early to mid-30s. Like, that pick could be very good. So, I mean, we'll see. We'll see if the Clippers can find a team that makes that type of deal, and if they're willing to sweeten the pot to that extent. Otherwise, I think the Sixers are just, like Daryl Morey proved with Ben Simmons 2 years ago. He's not afraid to take this up to the deadline. I think he knows, depending on how other teams start, like the Clippers might be the only bidder for now, but if another team with high expectations gets off to a slow start, who's to say they don't jump into the mix as well? I think my favorite idea that I came up with the other day that I really haven't seen anyone bring them up as a potential dark horse. We heard Miami, the Knicks, Toronto, maybe, like New Orleans. Could they be a third team?
Funny that you say that. That's exactly the team I was envisioning, of slow start, not necessarily a great like hypothetically, CJ McCollum feels like a great swap there for you swap those guys, and maybe Harden's the better player, but CJ kind of gives you some bolstering if you are the Philadelphia 76ers to at least get through this year. And now it's not going to help your cap space situation if you're the Sixers and you're trying to peddle that vision. But I don't know, man. It's you look around the league, and I think that's for a reason that not a lot of teams are interested right now. And obviously, like you said, that can change. And if the visions for these teams don't really go that well, then it wouldn't surprise me one bit if one of these teams decides to sniff around. Independent of the Harden situation, though, let's say he plays for the Sixers, and let's say he actually tries on an expiring contract where it's not guaranteed that he would, but let's say he does.
Mm-hmm.
Running back basically the same team outside of some 7th, 8th, 9th man kind of swap outs. Out Georges Niang, Jalen McDaniel, Shake Milton, in Patrick Beverley, Kelly Oubre, Mo Bamba, different versions of different players and but about the same quality. This team won 54 games last year. They should still be good in theory, especially in the regular season if everybody's going the same direction. Now, it's hard to recreate what was last year and what that was actually looking like. And I think there's a lack of juice on this team, especially if Harden is kind of if he's not really doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The one guy that you could really see stepping up in that regard is Tyrese Maxey, and I hope that he continues to push higher and higher up the pecking order in the NBA. Where do you see his future going, kind of if Harden is here, and where do you see his future going if Harden is traded?
Yeah, I mean, either way, they want him to get more on-ball reps this year. I think, obviously, if Harden goes, he's going to be the full-time point guard. But even if Harden plays and stays, I think Nick Nurse has been emphasizing ball movement and player movement much more than Doc Rivers did. Daniel House Jr., in one of the many Sixers subtweets about Doc Rivers over the last couple weeks, House is like, Doc's offense was just two guys. It was just running through James and Joel, and this offense under Nick Nurse is much more egalitarian. So, it's going to force James Harden, that's another big question. Even if he is willing to come back to the Sixers, which is already a stretch, is he willing to conform to this new system of Nick Nurse when he has this very specific way of playing, which is I'm going to commandeer the ball in the half-court offense and dribble for 20 seconds every possession? I'll believe it when I see it. I'm very, very skeptical of that.
The first 10 games for that reason are going to be very fascinating to watch.
yeah, exactly. But I think Maxey, he's at least, everyone in the organization loves him. He's just an absolute joy to be around. He has surpassed their expectations every year. His work ethic is insatiable. So I think you don't want to put a ceiling on him. I think there are very clear limitations based on his size. His playmaking, I think, is the big swing skill this year. So we'll see how well he's able to facilitate in the half court. We have already seen some promising developments in that regard this year, just through training camp and the preseason. So I think, a full year of experience getting these reps will only benefit both him and the Sixers in the long run. But that's probably the big question. The big non-Harden question is, how does Maxey fare in this full-time ball handler role? And really, how do all of the Sixers adapt to this new scheme under Nick Nurse?
Maxey's a very efficient player, very effective outside shooter, doesn't turn the ball over that much. And there is a reason to believe why he can rise up the ranks a little bit and take on a higher level of usage. And he just does seem wired that way as well, where, he could take up a little bit of extra attention, but even if he does, the guys that you need around a player like him and Embiid to a certain extent, like you need the 3-and-D types, you need the versatility, and I just think this team kind of lacks that unless, D'Anthony Melton is a great defensive player and he would be pretty helpful. Kelly Oubre, there's a nice flyer there. We'll see what he actually looks like and whether he, like, I'm still trying to figure out whether he's a helpful basketball player or not. There's at least an argument one way or the other on him. I go back and forth because this team won 54 and they're not changing much, but the actual like elephant in the room is the other ball handler outside of Tyrese Maxey going to be like keep his head on straight throughout the season, and we just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's really hard to analyze basketball when it comes to the Sixers because of this James Harden question. I will say Danny Green is another guy. He's on a fully non-guaranteed deal right now. Starts to get guaranteed opening night and gradually from there. Looked surprisingly good in the preseason so far. And, that was one of the big questions when they signed him was, last year didn't play very much, recovering from the ACL and LCL injury he suffered 2 years ago. So was it, he's just rushed back and was ineffective and just needed to get a little bit under his belt and now will be back closer to his former self, or, he's in his mid-30s. Is he just dust at this point? And we won't know the answer to that until we get through the regular season. But, I think there's more hope right now than there was even a week ago that maybe it was just, he's working his way back from the injury and he is closer to that. Jaden Springer's another guy who's looked pretty good in the preseason so far, third-year guard. I mean, it's going to be hard for him to get minutes, I think, if Harden does return, because you figure Maxey, Harden starting backcourt, and then presumably Melton and Pat Bev are going to be the first two guards off the bench. But Nurse did make it sound as though he and Beverly are battling for minutes there, and I think it would really behoove the Sixers to find out what they have in this kid before they have to make a decision on whether to extend him or not after this year,
right,
before he becomes a restricted free agent 2025. The defense is excellent already. It's just, offensively, shooting is a huge question mark still. Finishing around the rim, he's gotten better in that regard since coming into the league. He spent, most of his time in the G League over the last 2 years. So there's some promise there. He's just so unknown still because he really hasn't gotten a ton of time. And then Paul Reed, I think, is the other young guy who, they are baking in some higher expectations for. Utah signs him to this offer sheet they match over the offseason. And Nick Nurse was talking him up, not in the same vein as Pascal Siakam, wasn't, making a one-on-one comparison to Siakam, but was saying I see some similar attributes and I could see him taking after Siakam in certain ways. So, Paul Reed was another one in the Doc subtweets. Said if I was shooting threes last year, I probably would have played 10 games. And now I'm being openly encouraged to shoot threes. So he's, I think he's still trying to find his way in this new system, and it's going to be a learning process for him. But I think there are some high hopes internally for him this year.
It would be cool if he could play with Embiid because I think fewer minutes for PJ Tucker, fewer minutes for Tobias Harris in that spot, and kind of giving some defensive juice and athleticism and something. There's something to that, to being able to play both of those guys together. So that's something that I'd watch out for if I'm watching the Sixers. Okay, I think I'm going to predict this team to win 47 games, which is a 7-win drop, despite the fact that they're basically bringing back the same roster, kind of, in terms of the main top guys. A 7-win drop feels precipitous, but there are some other teams that are kind of rising up in the Eastern Conference, and I think the bottom of the East is better than it has been in recent years, and there's fewer, I think, just cakewalk victories that the Sixers are going to get. Where would you put a win total for this team?
Yeah, I think at FanDuel, their line is 47.5. So you are right.
Fantastic.
The odds makers always know, man. They always know. Yeah, I actually just did an over-under podcast with Josh Everly that is coming out over the weekend. And I think both he and I took the under on the 47.5. again, it's just because right now we don't know with James Harden. I struggle to believe that he is going to come back and give his full effort if they don't trade him in the first few days or weeks of the season. Like it just, we've seen this before. We know how this is going to end. And if you are subtracting James Harden from last year's team and you are not adding a replacement for him, which they will not until they actually trade him, that is a big loss. I think that could easily account for 7 wins right there. Just that. And then if Embiid misses time, if Maxey misses time, if both Harden and Maxey are gone, they are really, really light on even like league average point guard. So
Right.
I think there's a lot more that can go wrong for them that could push them under, then a lot has to go right for them to go over that line. So I think the under is right. I think, they easily could win 50 games. That's the ridiculous part of this team. Like, it wouldn't shock me if they go over, but I think, in that 46, 47 range, just based on the uncertainty with Harden, seems like the right play for now.
There are some, I think, similarities between when Denver lost Murray and Porter in that 2021-22 season, and they won 48 games. They had to struggle the entire year just to get to that number, because if you're missing some of that top talent, and whether he's not playing or whether he's just kind of half-assing, or if it's trading him for role players that might fit, but they also might not be as talented. Like, I think there's some reasons to bake that into all of this prediction as well. Is there any way that this team makes a deep playoff run? Like, sell me on it.
It would just be so them for the 1 year they don't enter with expectations to somehow this is the year they make it to the conference finals. I don't see it. I mean, especially after Milwaukee gets Dame, Boston gets Drew Holiday. I know both of these teams are now really top heavy, so I guess that's the path, is that, injuries knock out a key piece for both Milwaukee and Boston. All of a sudden the East is wide open. But I feel like those two teams are very clearly the two best in the East. Cleveland's still around. Miami, as much as everyone wants to doubt them, they're not. I think the Sixers probably have a better regular season record than Miami, but Miami, we've just seen Jimmy Butler level up in the playoffs every year for the past couple of years, and the Sixers do not have a quote unquote Jimmy Butler stopper. They have a bunch of different guys they could throw at him, but none of them seem like they would be very effective. So, yes, they technically could, because they were 1 quarter away from going to the conference finals last year. Like, if they just knock down a couple, DeAnthony Melton hits a couple wide open threes, or James Harden just doesn't completely commandeer the offense in the fourth quarter of Game 6, they win that game, they're in the conference finals, and who knows what happens. I think the narratives about this team, about certain individual players on this team, like, everything would be radically different, but no, we'll see. I think we are maybe collectively underrating the upgrade from Doc Rivers to Nick Nurse. So I think that is I know Toronto fans in particular would laugh at that, and they're like, all right, have fun with that one. But, then I would retort with, like, did you watch Doc Rivers over the last couple of years? And, like, given how many, it's House, Embiid, Reed, Jaden Springer have all come out and taken subtle shots at, how things are better under Nick Nurse. Now they're having more fun with this system. And, I think his willingness to experiment, I wrote about this at Liberty Ballers, I think that's going to be the biggest change for this team compared to Doc, where it's like, okay, we figured out that James Harden, Joel Embiid pick and roll is really effective. We are just going to spam this as much as we possibly can, and it's going to get us, 54 wins or whatever. But then we get to the playoffs, and Boston figures it out, save for one game where they just inexplicably stopped guarding it the way they were. And then the Sixers didn't have a counterpunch. I think this year they're going to experiment. They're going to try a lot more different combinations of guys, different rotation patterns, different defensive schemes. They did play a lot more zone under Doc last year than they had in previous years, but obviously Nick Nurse is known for, do we see a box and one, a triangle and two? Like, who knows what we're going to get?
Man, that would imagining Joel Embiid trying to play a box and one or a triangle and two is very funny, actually. But
yeah,
look, I do think that the burden of proof is on each of the individual Sixers to prove that these last few years are not on them.
Yeah.
And that they are on Doc, and that is going to, like, I think, manifest. Like, Doc can, to his credits, like, he can say he put Harden and Embiid in positions where it was on them to be able to do the thing, and they didn't do the thing, and they really struggled in that Game 7 especially. So I think Harden's getting traded. I think that Daryl Morey is going to make a strong Tyrese Maxey All-Star push around January. And there's going to be some good things that come out of this year. And maybe it's a better long-term thing for the Sixers, and maybe it's a better thing for next year that they make that move. They add some people in the next offseason, and we can talk about them in a completely different light. But this year feels like a transition year because the transition hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
So
I
mean, we will see.
The one other thing is, like, if this is the year Joel Embiid stays healthy in the playoffs, I mean, he gets hurt every year or something happens every year. Like, that is the one other hope, that we eventually finally get this healthy playoff run from him. But at the same time, we saw Nick Nurse's, willingness to run Siakam into the ground, Fred VanVleet into the ground last year.
Yeah.
So that's what makes you a little nervous. You don't want to see Joel Embiid playing 38 minutes per game in the regular season.
And not to mention, like, I mean, he did get hurt. It's not his fault, but the burden of proof is also on him to stay healthy. Like, It just is. He's got to do it. No questions asked. And the team should try to help him get to that route, go down that path as best as they can. And that will probably hurt their regular season record as a result. But we will see. He is Bryan Toporek, covering the Sixers for Forbes and Liberty Ballers, as well as the host of the NBA Pod. Bryan, thank you so much. I know this wasn't a fun one necessarily, but hopefully we can have some more fun conversations about Tyrese Maxey during the regular season.
Absolutely, yeah. The James Harden traded podcast I'm looking forward to.
Thanks, dude.